Let's try to get through this budget. As Peter said, it was too big for him to bring to the studio, so let's get some immediate reaction. Maya McGinnis, she is president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, and she released a statement which reads in part, quote, "We needed the president to use this opportunity to begin tackling the drivers of our growing debt." She added that the budget plan, again quoting, "does too little to get control of the long-term debt," end quote. Did the White House miss an opportunity today?
Well, they might have not fully captured the opportunity today, but they did something very important last week, which is the key driver of our long-term fiscal deficits is health care. And last week, the Department of Health and Human Services, Secretary Burwell, came out with specific goals for moving away from fee-for-service payment in Medicare. That is more important than anything in this budget document with regard to where we're going to wind up in 2030 or 2040 in terms of our debt.
Is it going to make a dent?
I think that will, if it's backed up with specifics. That is the most important thing that drives our long-term fiscal future, and the best way to contain costs in healthcare is to stop paying for quantity. When you pay for quantity, that's what you get.
Yesterday on NBC's Meet the Press, the House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Paul Ryan was on. He criticized the budget even before it came out. He accused President Obama of trying to, in his words, exploit envy economics. Does Chairman Ryan have a point, given that part of the president's budget proposal includes higher taxes on wealthy Americans and on corporations?
I don't know that the rhetoric there is what's important. The question is, are these proposals, reasonable, and are they likely to be enacted? I'd say most of them are reasonable, and most of them are not likely to be enacted.
Why do you say that?
We are living in a highly polarized environment in which the two parties have dramatically different visions for how to move forward. A good example, as we mentioned earlier in your coverage, this corporate tax proposal. It sounds like the two parties are moving together, but a 19% minimum tax on global profits is very close to a system that taxes global profits, period, and not the kind of territorial system that the Republicans want. So it's easy to say they're kind of throwing together ideas that sound similar, but they're actually quite different at this point.
Sir, as you know, the budget is based on certain economic growth assumptions for the coming years, that GDP is going to increase, that the unemployment rate is going to fall by a couple of points. Are those assumptions, at least in part, also based on the legislative branch doing its part to help this economy gain momentum?
Yeah, the administration's budget will have economic assumptions that assume that its budget is enacted. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there.
Sure. Okay, let's assume you talked about on the tax front. The president wants to raise the top rate on capital gains and dividends to 28% from 23.8%. Do you understand the other side of the argument where people say that that is seen as penalizing success?
Yeah, I understand the argument. To me, the key question is, what is the economic impact? And most of the evidence suggests that despite all the rhetoric around capital gains tax rates, that there is much less adverse effect from a higher capital gains tax rate than one would believe when you sort of listen to most cable news coverage.
Okay, but given the cable news coverage and given what we've heard on Bloomberg, there are people who say, I've earned this, I've worked for this, now we are basically realigning funds. You're taking money that I have made through my hard work and sweat equity, and you're giving it to the middle class. Can it not be seen as class warfare, as the president's critics suggest?
Well, I think, again, everything's within, some limit. The question is, we do have a capital gains tax rate. The question is what the right level is, and you have to balance all of the various considerations. I don't think the capital gains tax rates that are under consideration here, which, by the way, we've experienced in the past, it's not like these are out of historical experience. I don't think they'll lead to economic disaster. They're also not a panacea. So let's just kind of put everything in context here.
I'm speaking with Peter Orszag. He serves as director of the Office of Management and Budget under President Obama. Sir, if the real drivers of debt, such as entitlement programs, are not addressed, do they threaten the president's other priorities?
Ultimately, of course, and that's what brings us back to the single most important thing we can do is we've had this great experience over the past 5 years or so of much slower growth in healthcare. Medicare spending per person in inflation-adjusted terms was lower in 2014 than in 2013. That's unbelievable. That needs to be continued, and we need to be doubling down on that. We're at a very sensitive moment right now, which is we could be at a tipping point where that becomes reinforced, or we back off from it. We've got to reinforce the trends that are so encouraging in healthcare.
Mr. Orszag, you know the Democrats took a beating at the polls in the midterm elections. Are you surprised that the president's budget strategy is so aggressive, given that it seems that the overwhelming majority of Americans opted for something different?
No, and I think this is consistent with the State of the Union. I think at this point, the depressing part of this is very little of any of the stuff that was in the budget is going to be enacted legislatively. So if that's true, then the question is what kind of document do you send up? And unfortunately, we're seeing the reaction that should have been predictable, which is that a lot of this is dead on arrival.
Okay, a lot of it's dead, but not all of it.
Maybe not all.
Are there some areas of compromise, such as corporate tax reform?
It's possible. I'm skeptical on corporate tax reform. Again, it's easy to say corporate tax reform at the kind of, everyone's in favor of corporate tax reform at the high level. It's when you get to the specifics that it gets hard, and the administration started to put out some specifics here. That's going to be challenging. There are some things that are likely to happen. For example, for reasons I still have difficulty understanding, both parties seem aligned on repealing something called the medical device tax. That will probably be gone at some point this year. There will be a series of things that happen, but in terms of broad-scale corporate tax reform or broad-scale immigration reform, I wish this weren't true, but I'm a skeptic.
I have to delve into presidential politics. Is this a budget, or is it really a blueprint for Hillary Clinton going into 2016?
I guess we'll see.
Peter Orszag, the former director of the Office of Management and Budget, and now vice chairman of corporate and investment banking at Citigroup, flying in today from the Super Bowl. You're a Patriots fan.
I'm born in Boston.